Get those managers developed throughout the organization, having them understand exactly what engagement is about, the role they play in the whole engagement scheme. It's not just the organization that comes back and our scores were very low. Well, that comes back down to every manager.
Welcome. If it's Friday, it's the CEO series. Very excited to have as a guest today, Nedra Dickson, who's the Managing Director of Accenture's Global Supplier Diversity and Sustainability Program. To give you a little background, Nedra is responsible for Europe Procurement Operations in 30 countries. And here was a stat that stood out for me. With strong expertise in procurement transformation and supplier relation management, she has managed over $2 billion in contingent labor spend. And the rest of her bio will probably take another show. So we'll take it from there. And I want to say, Nedra, thank you so much. It's like a reunion here. Thank you so much for being a guest.
Oh, thank you, Ron. I agree. It's like a reunion. I'm so excited to see you. This is great. Thank you for having me.
So glad to have you here. So let's talk about Supplier Diversity Sustainability Program. Can you give us the listeners some insight as to what that's about and the impact it possibly could have on organizations and their workers?
Absolutely. I think I have an amazing role here. So when you look at the landscape of supplier diversity, and we know diversity means different things in different countries. So if you start here in the US, supplier diversity is where it's 51% owned, the company, by a minority that's in an underrepresented area. So that could be any women-owned businesses, that could be minority-owned business, veterans, people with disabilities. And so I get a chance to work with these businesses, and mainly most of them will be technology companies, but they can range from marketing or facilities. And we get a chance to really help integrate them into a corporation supply chain and get us a chance to work with some of those small businesses.
So how would a company build in this type program? Because there's a lot of information out now. There's a lot of articles about, the importance of this. How do we make the business case to an organization that this should be at the top of the food chain as it relates to strategy?
Now, as you see it, it's like we've focused on the diversity of our workforce. So we've really been looking at that. Now we're looking at the diversity in our supply chain. So I think the importance that's coming from the top down is if we want to attract the right talent, I'm very thankful for this generation because they're holding us accountable for making sure that we are creating an inclusive marketplace. Mm-hmm. And it's making your company attractive to the talent that wants to work with you and make sure that we're looking at having that diversity there. And we want our communities where we live and work to reflect that.
Mm. That's a very important point because I work with some colleges here in Dubai, American University in the Emirates. And one of the things that I've noticed from interacting with the younger people, in college, coming out and going into the workforce, there's a different sense of what they're looking for, more purpose-driven than just the kind of a job that we may have been focused on that.
And that's so right, because if you think now, there's something about putting out a statement of what you're going to do, but seeing that action. And I think, again, this generation is like, yes, a statement of what you're going to do is very well, very good. But what actions are you taking to make sure that is happening?
Yeah. Every company, if you go to their website, they have mission, core values, and all this thing. But I've always said, if I stood outside with a microphone and would ask people as they're coming out of the so-called gate, what are your thoughts on the purpose of your organization? It probably would be, I'm sure the answer would be, I don't have a clue as to what that is.
And I think that's why, when you think about what you're doing with just getting that strategy of how you're going to do that, how are you going to implement that, is what's so important. We can say it, but what are the steps that you take? And I always say the very first one is to get that C-level buy-in. They need to understand, again, the total landscape, that people have options, and they're going to want to make sure that you are applying what you're saying, and I can see it. Yeah.
Well, see, you connected into the so-called business case behind it. But leaders sometimes, when you talk a business case, they think of numbers. How can I equate the numbers into that business case? But we should also think in terms of talent, because what about that pool of people that would be considering your organization?
And that too, and I won't, not leave out the return on investment, because everyone definitely want to see that. And if you think about it, I think the University of Washington did a study. For every $1 million that a small, diverse business, earns, they're employing 13 people in the community. So when you think about it now, you're employing people in your community. When a smaller company can be more nimble, and I think we saw that with COVID and some of the PPE equipment, there were small businesses that were stepping up and, pivoting to, produce many PPE when the larger companies had to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned that study, and that's very interesting. 1 to 13 ratio. Was that the deficit of leadership? So if you think of leadership competencies that were developed pre-COVID, and then you think of COVID, and then you think of competencies for post-COVID, that's missing in the mix somewhat. And I've seen a lot of articles, discussing that as to how the leaders were kind of sitting back, and the I'm going to say younger, more nimble organization that stepped up to the plate and they took it and started running.
Absolutely. So I think too, now large corporations we're going to start seeing more collaboration and with those small businesses and the large corporations, because I think that's where we're seeing there's plenty of room for everyone, and it's not one or the other. It's about how do we now take this new landscape, this unknown landscape that we didn't know, and what do we do to move it forward? What do we do to move it? How do we go to? I always like to say it's going to be collaboration and co-innovation together.
Okay. I read an article earlier today, and it was talking about this new workplace. You mentioned earlier before we started the call as to how organizations were going to step up and address these issues. So if we think of pre-COVID to so-called post-COVID, there's a transformation that's going on.
Yes.
And it speeded everything up at warp speed. So if you think of the concept of design from disaster, what would happen, and how can leaders think in terms of how are we going to build this new kind of approach? You mentioned logistics earlier.
Yes, and I think it's going to be several things. I think we're going to start seeing a hybrid mix of things, right? So, and I'll take it as the large conferences or things we have. Corporations see now, do I need to fly everyone there? So there might be a mix, but there's still that face-to-face interaction that we need as humans. And so nothing is going away. I think it's just going to be that hybrid mix. So how are we going to do that? And I think one of the other things that COVID exposed that I think you and I talked about was the disruption of the supply chain.
Yeah.
And we're really seeing that, whether it's getting laptop parts, or if it's getting equipment or things that we needed from grocery stores.
Yeah.
It's now going to shift the mind for corporate. How do we track that asset management? How do we ensure that disruption doesn't happen? So there's going to be, I think, more conversations again on how to be prepared, if that's such a thing to do, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be a lot of innovation on how we can get ahead of things in the future.
Well, one of the metaphor I use for that is the Petri dish. We took science in school.
Yes.
It goes back a ways, the Petri dish, and you're experimenting. So if you think of the workplace, the workforce, each of those three are going to have to be totally redesigned. And if you were to take away everything and say, hey, start from scratch, no more 40-hour work week, no more 8 hours per day, no more time. But I think leaders a lot of times are a little skittish because they feel that I grew up in this structured environment and maybe I'm having a tough time trying to reimagine.
And I think, that's definitely what's going to happen, because we have these structures. So we have these amazing buildings, and no one is going to, not go into those. But I think everyone is going to be, I don't want to say forced, but I think everyone's going to be a little more elastic in their thinking around, we're going to have to figure out, we can still co-create in a lot of the innovation hubs that corporations have designed, but then we're also going to start thinking there's entrepreneur startups areas where they like to co-create together. There's a boardroom where we like to have a strategy. How do we bring that together? I think that's an opportunity for someone out there.
Yeah. Well, see, my take is the same as yours. It is probably the most fantastic time to be involved in an organization if you're trying to figure out what the next level is. So you think of Industrial Revolution 3.0, and then it's 4.0.
Yes.
You call it whatever number you want. You got a chance to start from scratch. So I use the term design from disaster. How would you design or reimagine everything?
Yes. And I think that's what I want everyone to know, that this is now almost a blank canvas for us to see what we can do and make it better. We've seen how it completely shut down the world. And so it didn't just affect one part of the world, as we initially thought, oh, this is not us. Now it's everyone. It's on this global scale. So how do we really bring this opportunity together? And it's perfect what you said, disaster by design. And I think that's exactly what we have to do.
Mm-hmm. A good friend of mine, Peter Mikowski, Peter, if you're listening, told me something right after Peter is the CEO for a hospital in Abu Dhabi. And he told me the story about when the hospitals were ground zero, and what he had noticed, and how every day he was taking notes as to what was happening, what he was seeing, and he was capturing this information. Not so much from an analytical perspective, but he was just capturing insights that he was deriving from that. And I asked him, I said, so what do you plan to do with? He said, I plan to look at everything and rethink everything as it relates to leadership development, all of this. And I said, smart CEO, not only a good friend, but smart CEO.
I think that's right. And I think that actually goes into the part of also into sustainability, right? Because now CEOs are thinking, how am I going to be responsible in my buying? How am I going to be responsible in my business? So now we've seen this. That's going to see, how do I make sure that what we're doing is better for the environment, better for people, and it's better for everyone. Am I being responsible in everything I'm doing? And that's where sustainability has entered in this this play, right? It's because are we not going to be going in our offices all the time? So should we be looking at renewable energy? How do we look at that? We're not in that office all the time. Are we responsible on how we're looking at, what we're doing? We're not going to be flying all the time. Are we looking at our carbon footprint? That's where I say that hybrid model. So I think, Ron, I like what we've said. It's disaster by design, and then we got to create a great sustainable hybrid model.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take credit for disaster by design. I was watching a documentary the other day, and they talked about how every plane crash, they figure out what happened to cause it, and then they go back and design the product differently. And the name of the documentary was designed by disaster. And I said, that's so appropriate for today because COVID shut down the world. So what can we learn from that? It's kind of like Peter says, I wanted to learn who the nurses were who were stepping up to the plate. I wanted to learn who the doctors were stepping up to the plate. And I think, and this is just the Ron Thomas version of that, is that we have to keep the antennas up and we try and learn from what's happening.
Exactly. And I think that also goes into, it's a continuous learning, right? It's you're always doing a continuing of learning something new because we don't know what's going to be the next design, right? So it's and that's what I think I really like about when I get a chance to work with diversity, because you have such amazing minds that are thinking differently. And that's what I think, all about inclusion and diversity is. It's about, let's cast a wider net and let's find those innovative thought leaders that's going to really show us different ways of working. And that's what we're doing by creating an inclusive marketplace.
Yeah. I'm reading a book, Audible now, Humocracy. And Humocracy talks to that same concept of listening to your customers, listening to your employees. The brain trust should not all rest in the so-called C-suite. And that could be even something as simple as talking to your client, talking to your customers to see what they're facing, talking to the employees inside of the organization. And if we can kind of pull back and get all of that insight, we can design a better product or whatever may be the business outcome of that.
Yes, and that again is what we're looking at, right? It's taking some of that brain power, taking some of that, thought leadership of what does this look like in a, now it used to be, we used to look at 3, 5, 7 years. Now I think people are looking at 6, 9, 18 months. It's getting shorter and shorter.
I did a strategy session for a client the other week. And, I saw the discussion around 3 to 5 years. I said, forget about that. There's no need. Go back 2 years. Would you have envisioned this?
Yes.
And so you hear the term agile, and agile is kind of an overused term. But I understand it from the concept of that. If you're sensing what's happening, you're constantly in remodeling mode. So there's no fixed structure.
Exactly. And I think that agile and the word pivot as well is another one that's been really, used so much. And what does that really mean? It's like almost if you're constantly remodeling, like you're saying, are you really going to have to pivot? You're constantly, staying on top of what's next. And I think that's where the entrepreneur spirit comes in, where that's an entrepreneur. They're always thinking, they're always remodeling. And I think corporations are going to have to start allowing their employees to have that entrepreneurship mindset in order to really continue to shift to where the market is heading.
Yeah. Well, the book is, I think it's Gary Hamel that wrote the book, and it talks about humocracy versus bureaucracy. And
that's a good one.
So that was kind of the context of that. The bureaucracy, everything is structured. All the brain power sits up here. Humocracy says, so our R&D department from the bureaucracy side could be a department of 15 people.
but bureaucracy says everyone in the organization is a part of R&D.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
And was that the mindset before? No. It's new. So we're reading, like, these books are probably out there. Like, now I got a list, so I need you to publish a list of all your books, right?
My books are Audible, so I'll give you a copy of. Yeah.
Well, yes, I still like. I told someone I still like the feel of pages, but I'm getting to the Audible books. I'm getting to the e-readers. I'm trying to be a steward of being sustainable and environment friendly.
Yeah. I know. Well, I find the Audible books because I can do that when I'm doing something else. Mm-hmm. If I'm walking, I can listen to a book for 2 hours each day. So I can finish a book in possibly 3 days. But so let's take that a step further and think about the leaders inside of an organization. Fixed mindset. We've been doing it a certain way. And the new side says the Audible approach, and every day is learning. What are you learning from today? Peter says, I learn every day. Do you think that's a key component of leadership today? That
it has to be. I agree with that statement. And I believe that I like to end each day on something that I've learned new. If that's something... And I found that puts me in a different mindset to go to the next day. And when you're virtual now, you're on the phone all day. And so you're going from call to call. But I'm like, what can I do differently that's going to make this better the next day? And so having that mindset, and I think leaders are doing that now, because if you look at corporations and what they're doing, they're actually having these innovation contests within. They're encouraging the employees to now, do something. And learning is virtual. You don't have to send everyone to a physical training session now. So I think leaders are adopting that mindset. If they want to continue to be that leader, you've got to adopt that mindset, because it's constantly learning, whether it's a simple thing. I have an example of one training we had to do that I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. And it's the best. It's storytelling. And we did a series of videos where our senior leaders would give us examples of how they would tell a story, whether it was to a client or to a leadership class, but it was how they were doing this, and it was constantly learning. So to see our senior leaders applying things that they've learned and then paying it forward was like, okay, maybe the mind shift is changing. And I now leverage what I've learned from that forward. But had I not seen our senior leaders adopt that,
and
how would I feel about it?
Go ahead. No, I was thinking, I said, how does that cascade down? So as impactful as that was, how many levels can we cascade that down and talking about storytelling? So one of the things, from a personal note for the both of us, we're both from the South. We're both from small towns in the South. And growing up, we always heard stories from the grandparents talking through things. And you'd sit there as a child and you'd listen to these stories. And from my side, that kind of put me into the storytelling mood. I can take something and relate it to something and kind of weave it through. Did you pick up that too from growing up in the South?
Absolutely. And you wanted to listen to the grandparents. You were so captivated because they commanded respect. And I think that is exactly how I look at a leader now in business, is that if it's actually being demonstrated that our senior leadership has adopted this, I'm now listening because they're applying it to their everyday. So you do want to cascade it down, because I think that's where the leaders are born, It's back to not do as I say, do as I do.
Yeah.
Not sure I said that correctly, but it's all about example on, if I see you doing it, I see how you are applying this every day in running multi-billion-dollar corporations. I think I might want to apply that too and cascade that down to my team.
Yeah. Walking the walk, talking the talk.
Yes.
You're doing that. Because I always come back and say, you look at every organization and you see the mission statement, core values, and all these things. And one of the things that I did during the George Floyd era, and I saw all the statements from CEOs and I saw all the statements from leadership teams, I'd kind of click over to their website to do a little, see what they're talking about. And it didn't connect to that. It was totally different. There was a total disconnect.
And that is where I think the shift is coming.
Yeah.
It's now is that everybody can find everything. And I look at Generation Z and I'm just like, wow, if I'd been that old and growing up, right? That's just not how it was in our era. But it was, they are now, and I think that's coming back. We're being held accountable for those statements. It's no longer going to the PR way and I'm just going to put this out and this is going to go away in 7 days. This is my PR. No, this is your footprint. This is what you're on now, whether people want to work for this company.
Right. That's the value, EVP, the value proposition. I always kind of pose this question when I work with HR leaders. I said, if someone were to say, I have a couple other offers on the table, why should I join you? And I'm surprised, not really surprised, but I'm in shock that people can't really answer a simple question like that. And so that takes it back up to the purposes of what we're trying to do in the overall context of diversity, responsibility, sustainability, and all of that. They can't walk through a story as it relates to that.
That's the statement. I think that is the statement that everyone is going to have to ask themselves. If you're recruiting, they need to be prepared for that. Because again, I was like, okay, you want to hire me? Okay, I'm coming in. Now there's options. Now there's choice. And I always said, when we came out, I wanted to go to college. I wanted to get a job. I wanted to buy a house and I wanted to work at this company for 40 years and I want to retire. That model is not there anymore. It's still there, but they've shifted some of that. I might be okay if it's 5 of us living in a house because I want to go to a center where I can be, just let out my innovative thoughts and have someone just like that. I want someone the same mindset, and we're going to create virtual platforms. We're going to create mobility apps, and that doesn't have to be done in an office.
Yeah. Well, one of the key points you mentioned that I started laughing about was the fact that you said somebody's going to work there, then they're going to retire and all these kinds of things. That's a model that's not going to work anymore. I did some work for a bank in Singapore, and they talked about, the gentleman said, I'm going to be late tomorrow, Ron, because we have a retirement party. So right away, my inquisitive mindset kind of kicks in. So I said, how many years were they there? He said, they would have been there for 30 years. I said, how many people? He said, 2 to 3 people. I said, go back next year and the year before, trends, and how many people? He said, well, we don't have a lot like the way that we used to. And I said, the learning from that is that no one is going to ever join you again and it's going to say, I'm going to stay there for 20 years or 30 years. The so-called watch business for a gold watch, that's
exactly.
over with. So how do you max out that employee experience for 2 to 3 years? Because no one is going to stay. So we talk about this new generation. Yeah.
And I think that is the question. And I think now it's looking for the well-roundness. Like, I think corporations are going to have to play in every space. It's the mental health. How are you handling that for me? How are you handling, am I going to be able to innovate at this company? Am I going to be able to maybe work from home and do the father-daughter dance? It wasn't just one thing. thing now. It wasn't the security. It's not the 8 to 5. So I think for corporations to play in this new, it's got to be everything we just talked about. The watch business is gone. So what's new? You know, what's going now? So this is, I love this conversation because it still makes you constantly think, what's next? What do we do to change it?
So my thought to him was the next day when he came back, he came in, that next day, I said, so how did it go? I said, what was it? He said, it was kind of like, we had this dinner set up and it was only like 2 or 3 people in the room. So I said, so how are you going to take that and look back at the new workforce? Think of the people you just hired. And they've never stayed there for 20 years. So this is an expense you're going to not have to incur anymore. What are you doing to build in a value proposition for these people that are in the so-called, in the organization now? How are you going to make the experience for them? And he was kind of a blank slate because he hadn't given any thought to that, because his whole mindset was on the 20-year, 30-year retirement dinner.
Exactly. If you think about when the big technology companies really, kind of came onto the scene, if you look at the Googles and Facebook, their workspace was ping pong in the office. They had, candy bars and, we just wanted the office to close the door to work. Now you have the open workspace. Right? Exactly. Yeah. And so now it's the open workspace. It's the whiteboards that you write on. I even have a chalkboard here in my home office. And it's, it's again, what are those spaces going to be like in the future? Because you've got to change even that, thought of how it used to be with the closed door office. And you have some CEOs that are sitting in the open space area now.
Yeah. I was amazed when Mike Bloomberg was elected as mayor of New York, and one of his first so-called, I don't want to say interventions, was that he sat in an open pool. He didn't sit inside of the corner office kind of concept. And the article I was reading earlier today was about how maybe that whole office concept, HQ, C-suite has their offices. Can we be more innovative if we just sat together and had a conversation? So the example I always use is the Petri dish. Mm-hmm. So you can do. I mean, you don't have any. Forget about before. How would you do it differently? But I find when I have that discussion to leadership that they like the concept, but the mindset is still rooted into this concrete of the way that it used to be. How can we have that conversation?
I think we're going to have to constantly have that conversation. Yeah. It's not just how. I think it's going to be a constant conversation when you look at it. And they're going to have to, because I think we go back to what we just said. The 30-year retirement parties are not going to be there. The legacy systems are not going to be there. When you think about coming to work, it's like, okay, somebody's worked on a legacy system. No more. We're talking the cloud. We're talking digital. Yeah. We're talking different things. So it's going to have to be a constant conversation that we're going to have in order to make sure that we're back to this talent, that we're going to continue to attract talent.
Yeah. So how can we tie in supplier diversity and sustainability into the value proposition, the so-called EVP? What can we say, talking points, if you can?
I think we've said a couple, definitely around attracting talent. Mm-hmm. People are going to want to see their community reflected in where they live and where they work. That's going to be important for us to have that. If you're going to be that CEO that's going to attract that, you've got to cast a wider net to create that inclusive marketplace. Mm-hmm. I think that's one that they're going to have to do. The other one that I think you said was, again, it's the shift of the mindset to continue to be ahead and be innovative and learning from the disaster. If there's one, what are we going to do for that? And how are we going to be prepared for that? And then that value, the other value proposition to me as well is, if you're going to continue to be relevant in the market, you're going to have to get some of these small businesses and these diverse businesses that are owned by women, that are owned by veterans, that are owned by the different, underrepresented groups in many organizations. You're going to have to do that. And I'll give you a great example. We have a mentoring program where we do help the businesses grow. And we were graduating a class in South Africa. And I was really happy with this class I had. I thought it was great. We were graduating. And one of our Black-owned businesses, very small, came to me and he goes, I would really like this if everything was in one place. If I could remember what I was doing here and I could apply it there, if I could do a report. And here I am thinking, I've got this great global program. And that simple thought put me in our innovation hub for 4 days to come up with a digital tool that now we can deliver something more to more people, faster, better. And that just came from a small business coming to a large corporation, not afraid to give a thought, a concept. And then we co-design together.
Yeah. You got to read Humocracy, because that's one of the examples.
I'm taking note of that.
Yeah, because what happens is that we think that I say designed by conference room. Everything looks great in the conference room, and we go out, and it doesn't have the impact. So one of the throngs that I use when I'm talking to people, trying to develop people, is I talk about who's the audience that's going to impact. Let the audience or customers be a part of the solution.
That's it.
So if they gave you insight as to, well, you know what, that's great what you have, but why don't we approach it this way? Because here's some of the things that we're thinking.
And imagine if I didn't listen to that. So because of that, I now been able, and this was pre-COVID. So this is what I'm saying. You get a chance to see the diverse suppliers and the small businesses. His thought process was pre-COVID.
That's right. Yeah.
And so because of that, and because we listened, and because we wanted to say, hey, let's do this together. That goes back to my collaboration and co-innovate. I was now able to launch 2 new programs in 2 different geographies where I'm not there, because that is now something that was done. So I think if I look at the return on investment from that program that I had, now I'm able to see the investment because I've expanded. I've expanded to other geographies, and now I'm bringing it to different clients in different geographies. So there's my value prop. There's my return on investment, why I did it. And this is, again, the value that this small business was able to bring. So collaborating with him now allowed him to take that funds from, as us working together and purchasing this concept, to now go and apply that back to his community. He's now employing more people, and now he can continue to do something on a bigger scale.
What I got from that, your conversation around that, was listening. Because how many other people would have designed this concept and someone gave them feedback and it was, okay, great idea. And they went back to what they designed. So listening.
And you said to your customers, that's going to be my customer. So you said it, we have to listen to our customers, but I think we really have to listen. Meaning we have to be present when we're listening. And we've learned to multitask so much, we've probably missed things, not on purpose. just because we've constantly been so busy. And so I think the other thing COVID has allowed us to do is to slow down and really listen. And that's going to be so important, because whenever you're dealing with supplier diversity and someone says, oh, a business is too small, they're too risky to work with a large corporation. Oh, they don't have the capacity to work with a large company. That's where we're saying that the playing field is large. I'm not going to put a small business in a situation to where I'm going to ask them to deliver something for all 529,000 employees, but doesn't mean they can't. But I'm just saying there's big enough for us to look at that. So I think what supplier diversity is doing now is demystifying all of those myths that there are parts of where you can work and collaborate and co-innovate right there. I took on the risk. But I needed that concept and that idea to build something to scale. So I wasn't asking him to build it, but think about that. That concept is now allowing me to deliver something in 6 different countries with 5 more countries planned to deliver that.
So in other words, taking that feedback and building that back into the structure of the program. So there's that collaborate and co-innovate. Doesn't have to mean the size, the risk. That's the new model. And I think, you've just got me thinking here so much. So I'm so excited to talk to you. I love your thought process. It's a combination of everything when you look at what the C-suite has to look at now. And they do have to look, they have to listen. And I almost think that's the first thing. They've got to be willing to listen. Listen, I think listening, the leadership competencies of pre and then post, and I see empathy and I see all of those things. All of that's great. But the first thing you have to do is listen to someone. You have to listen to what they're saying. And I always go back to a story that when I was in New Jersey, my daughter came down to I had an office in my basement, and she came down, and I could tell by the way she was walking, she was struggling with something. And me being in this so-called solutioning mindset, and I'm working and she's talking and I'm listening. And then she said, "Are you listening to me?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Here's what you're going to do. You're going to do 1, 2, 3. She said, "Hold it for a second." She said, "I never asked you for a solution. I just want you to listen sometimes to what I'm saying, because you're always the answer to me. I'm not at work. This is family, and I need you to listen sometimes." I never forgot that. So anytime anyone talks to me, I'm just going to sit there and listen. If you want me to respond, I'll respond. If not, I'm not saying anything. But what can I use from that to maybe do better next time? Exactly. And I think now people want to really bring their authentic self. Yeah. And if I'm going to bring my authentic self in the workplace, you've got to listen to me, even if I look different, even if I think different, even if I have, just a different thought process. That's the whole makeup of supplier diversity and inclusion and diversity, is that like different minds are going to come together to a greater solution. Yeah. And different thoughts give you those great innovative solutions. So I think you're right. It's now what is the senior leadership going to do? And I always say, I've been here at Accenture for 20 years. What has kept me here? It was 20 years since we had that conversation. It's 20 years. Can you believe that? 20 years since I had a conversation with you, which I think shaped the person I am today. So I'm ever grateful for that. And I think that what's kept me there is the fact that I have a landscape where someone's going to sit down and listen to an idea that I might have. As crazy as that idea might be sometimes, I think having that and being able to listen. And I think the other thing, Ron, what I think is important is
people are going to have to admit when they didn't do something right or we're not there. And being able to admit that now allows you to be open to receive those ideas and listen properly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that brings up another key point is, you know, this can go on, but the trusting environment that we build with the team, that if they feel comfortable and say, you know what, I'm lost, I'm struggling, I don't know what to do next. And we all kind of zero in on it and we all help. As opposed to someone carrying that thought, not sleeping at night, knowing they got the big meeting coming up, and they know that they could possibly get in trouble as a result of that. So that leadership profile of the organization as a whole, which I tend to look at it as the organization, is what I deal with, is that how can we create a trusting environment that people feel comfortable if they're struggling in an area, they can expose that and say, here's what I'm struggling with. Can anyone help?
And that again is what I feel as though this new generation is bringing, that they are going to say, I don't understand this, or I really need help in order to deliver this important, you know, whether it's anything. If you're, you know, doing a workshop with a client, you need other people to do that. And I think that too is why all the other things have been brought to the forefront around mental health in the workplace. And that is just so important to me, that people feel comfortable to raise their hand and say, I'm not okay. So it's okay to say, I'm not okay. And that's that come down from that, you know, office behind closed doors, so that we can hear that. We can understand that somebody else might feel the same way I feel, that I'm not by myself in doing this.
I like that quote that you, okay to say I'm okay. Okay to say
it's okay to say I'm not okay.
Oh, wow. That's an article.
And I'm sure I read that somewhere too. So
that's okay. You get the royalty check if I write it.
I definitely don't think I made that up, but it's and you know, but you said it. What environment is being created now to have that trust to be able to do that, and trust in the workplace is so important. And how do you create that? And I think that's a part of the strategy and what we need to say we need help on. We need to create that boundary of trust for employees, for even leadership, to be vulnerable to that.
Yeah. From a leadership development standpoint, I think the pre-COVID concept of leadership development, forget about it and start over from scratch. Again, you're at the Petri dish. This leadership development that you were developing leaders based on KPIs, numbers, it's going to have to change. And everything that we've talked about talks through the new era of developing these people that are going to be leaders. Another interesting book is called It's the Managers by Gallup. And it says the same thing. We've developed leaders in such a way that was a structured environment. Now it's unstructured, a lot of ambiguity. How do you take those? And this is what Peter was talking about, was that I don't have all the answers. We're just going to try things. We're just going to experiment with things.
And I think that is where that is, and that goes back to your blank slate. So everything that we did, we knew about leadership, and that comes again, the 30-year, watch ceremony. That's not there. Where do we want to see ourselves? And it's this blank slate. Let's create it, but let's do it together. And I think this new era of leaders is understanding that that's what we're going to have to do, and that you're going to have to build meaningful relationships. Like I was very fortunate to build with you. I am and for feeling something so happy, being able to share the screen with the mentor is more important for me, that I think everyone should understand the importance of building authentic relationships, because this is where this has evolved to.
Yeah, that's a good closing comment, because to give the listeners some background, Nedra and I met 20 years ago, and we worked for Martha Stewart. And we'd always have these early morning conversations. And when Nedra came up with had this offer to go to Accenture now, and we had the conversation, stay or do I go? And we had I forget my thinking now, but my thought has always been, you have to explore. And that's how that happened. And you see what happened now. Let me read that stat again. Can I find it again? How much billion and $2 billion in contingent labor spend from having a conversation, and you were the director in IT, and you made that transition. Talk to me about that transition from IT to, I'm going to look at what you're doing now as more of a purpose-driven kind of a organizational approach.
And I like, again, telling this, because it wasn't just a conversation. It's actually tied back to everything we just said now. I trusted you as a leader that I could come and have this conversation about a career change.
Yeah.
So it started with the trust, the open door policy, that I could come in and have this conversation that could change my life. And so it started there. And you gave me it's like the confidence. And sometimes when you're talking to a leader, they can either take away that confidence or they can encourage that confidence. And you encouraged that confidence to go out and try something different. And I was like, yeah, I think I can do this. and shifting, that was like, yes, here's my education and IT, but I think I needed to do something different. Yeah. And I was able to still go into IT, still at a technology consulting firm, but now I had the confidence that I could try something different. And I did that by taking that step. And had someone not given me the confidence to do that, I don't even want to think where I am. So if I leave anybody on anything today, it is if you're a leader, please create that circle of trust. Ron, you did for me, and I am forever grateful. And please give that confidence and instill it in everyone and pay it forward.
Thank you for that. Let me just give some background to the audience. Nedra grew up in Arkansas. She holds an MBA from University of Southern Cal, BS degree from Florida State University, and a BA degree from California State at Northridge. So she's well equipped to do what she's doing and to be able to make that transition. Thank you so much for being a part of the CEO series on this Friday. And stay online, and we're going to be closing out in just a minute. But thank you so much. I can never tell you. I'll tell you when I see you how much it means for me to have you on the show from 20 years back.
Well, thank you, and believe me,
we still look great for 20 years, right? Aging 20 years, right?
Thank you. It is my pleasure, and thank you very much, Ron. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.